everyone, it's Bull like a leopard here, Ramon, coming to you. I was going to respond today to a number of topics related to the border crisis and the government shutdown for a couple reasons. It's been, I think it's been 18 days now since the government was shut down. For all I care, it can stay shut down, and it really isn't a problem to me. In fact, things are working better than ever before here in Ohio. And if people want to complain about federal employees not getting their paychecks, apparently I did hear today from a legal expert, Jay Sekulow, that if you're a federal employee, you can actually go to the bank. Okay, so according to Sekulow, there are low interest loans that are available. And apparently some of them are zero interest loans available to public employees. It says, amid the stalemate in Washington, credit unions and banks across the country are making accommodations for government employees. Launch Federal Credit Union is issuing a 0% interest rate loans of up to $3,000 to employees of the federal government. Some banks are waiving certain fees and allowing customers to break certificates of deposit early. With the government shutdown now in its 18th day, banks and credit unions are offering accommodations to federal workers who've seen their paychecks stop. Some 420,000 employees are considered essential and are working without pay, while 380,000 others have been ordered to stay home, according to calculations provided to CNBC by Paul Light, a professor of public service at New York University. The shutdown's reach also fans out to some 4 million contractors for the federal government, many of whom are unlikely to be included in any legislation Congress passes to make sure federal workers are compensated for the period the government was closed. So those people are probably going to be put out. In the meantime, credit unions across the country have stepped up to help with some of the more generous offers for affected government employees. Launch Federal Credit Union is issuing a 0% interest rate for loans of up to $3,000 to federal government employees. Navy Federal Credit Union is doing the same, but up to $6,000. Any legislation that was not passed as a bill by the House and then basically passed by the Senate and given and sent to the president, that basically has to be reapproved by the new House. That's one of the major, I would call it, that's basically one of the major issues where you see the Senate and the House are kind of a check on each other. So, for example, if you had a budget that was passed by the Senate exclusively, it would have to be, I believe that has to be passed by the House and then sent to the Senate. And again, so the Senate would have to approve its own bill if it wanted to send. I'm not even just talking about budgets. If they want to pass a law, they pass that law, send it down to the House, and then the House passes it, sends it back to the Senate. that I think is what happens when the Senate introduces a bill. But any bill that passes the House in a previous session is basically has to be passed by the House again once the new session is in order. So what if appropriations bills are not passed on time? If Congress does not complete action on an appropriations bill before the start of the fiscal year on October 1st, it must pass, and the president must sign a continuing resolution to provide stopgap funding for affected agencies and discretionary programs. So you might remember that this October, we were in the midst of an election. So by that date, President Trump must have passed a stopgap bill, a continuing resolution, in order to provide funding for the I believe even the last one that he passed was, I think, in November. So that kept the government open, I think, through the end of December at some point. If Congress doesn't pass it, the president will not sign a CR because it contains provisions he finds unacceptable. Agencies that have not received funding through the ordinary appropriations process must shut down operations. So this is why apparently only 25% of the government is shut down. People have to remember that a number of agencies, especially the ones that are deemed essential, have remained open. A dispute over delay or defunding of health reform legislation between President Obama and congressional Republicans led to a 16-day shutdown of ordinary government operations beginning October 1st, 2013. A dispute between President Clinton and congressional Republicans in the winter of 1995 to 96 produced a 21-day shutdown of substantial portions of the federal government. So those are I think that was the longest government shutdown that is on record. So we're actually approaching that. It could be that I think by Saturday, if the budget is not passed, we will break the record, and I personally have no problem with it. So anyway, there's the federal budget process works like this. It's a 9-step plan that the U.S. Congress uses to create the federal budget. The 1974 Budget Control Act established the process. The act gave Congress 3 powers. It allows the House of Representatives and the Senate to have their own standing budget committee. It created the Congressional Budget Office. It moved the beginning of the fiscal year from July 1st to October 1st. And it says the budget process starts a full year before the fiscal year does. The fiscal year starts on October 1st, the year before the calendar year starts. December 2016, agencies submitted their final budget requests. OMB then assembled the final budget and sent it to the incoming president. So that is interesting because that year they had a new president coming in. So they had to basically, it looks like a lot of the times this process can take even longer than it should because, the president changes over. Obviously, Congress changes over. You also have here, in January 2017, the deadline for president to outline his budget priorities is the State of the Union address. The Council of Economic Advisors submitted their economic report for the president. It analyzed economic trends. President Trump's State of the Union was February 27, 2017. The first Monday in February 2017, the deadline for the president to submit his budget to Congress. This is typically delayed for new administrations. Trump submitted the 2018 budget outline on May 23rd, 2017. The president's budget put his priorities into dollars and cents for 3 areas. So this means essentially that Trump's first year in office, he was still running on the previous administration or the previous Congress's budget, which would have needed the approval of both the Republican Congress and President Obama. So the first financial year of Trump's presidency was basically the budget approved by Obama and the Republican Congress. Now, this has nothing to do with let's talk about the economy, for example. Yes, the budget does affect the economy. No, it's not as if growth is limited only to areas where the government affects budget, because you have to remember that the market reacts to a number of policy changes. So a number of the regulatory changes that Trump enacted during his first year in office, and a number of changes that were forecast because people were observing what his administration was doing. That is one of the reasons that you have these changes in growth patterns and markets. Okay, among many other factors. Okay. The first Monday in February 2017, so that was the deadline. Funding levels for federal agencies. So Trump submitted the 2018 budget outline on May 23rd, 2017. The president's budget put his priorities into dollars and cents for 3 areas: funding for federal levels for federal agencies, changes to mandatory programs already enacted by Congress. These include Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid, the Troubled Asset Relief Program, and the Affordable Care Act. Changes to the tax code. The budget must show the impact on federal revenue. Then on April 15th, Congress prepares a budget resolution to guide spending. The House and Senate budget committees each hold hearings with agency officials to explain why they need the funds requested. The committees submit their resolutions to a floor vote. A combined Senate and House conference committee works out their differences. The final budget resolution must be passed by majority votes in the House and Senate. Often Congress skips this step and defaults to the prior year's resolution. So it looks like in many years they simply that's how you get the continuing resolutions. Then in June, Congress uses the budget resolution to guide appropriations bills. October 2017, deadline to sign all bills into law. So that's the first year of the new federal financial year. the first day of the federal financial year. July 15, 2018, the president submits a mid-session review of the budget to Congress. So that's basically the budget process, and that kind of explains to you why it is, to answer the question, the current Congress would have to reapprove last December's budget proposal by the Republican Congress. So Nancy Pelosi would have to have, I guess, the House Appropriations Committee approve that budget and bring it to the floor, and then she would have to have the entire Democratic she would have to have the majority of the House approve it. So she would have to have a significant number of Democrats, probably in the area of 30 to 40 Democrats, join with the entire Republican caucus and pass that budget, which, let's all be sane here, she's not going to do. So, amid all this, what is that? Why should we care about that? Okay, so what do the different adversaries, the different parties on either side have as options? So, if you're talking about Congress trying to circumvent the president and get the budget passed, there is the veto override, okay? And over here it says Congress can override a regular presidential veto with a 2/3 vote of those present in both the House and the Senate. As of 2014, presidents had vetoed more than 2,500 bills, and Congress had overridden less than 5% of those vetoes. The Constitution does not give the president the ability to reject parts of a bill and approve the remainder, or line item veto power, which most state governors have. Since the 1870s, more than 100 amendments have been proposed to change this, but none have been passed. In 1995, Congress passed a law giving the president the line item veto, but the Supreme Court later ruled it unconstitutional on the grounds that it gave the president more power than the Constitution allowed. So essentially, this meant that in 1995, Congress basically said, well, if we want the president to be able to cancel one line out of the federal budget, he could. And the president could basically go and say, well, I'm signing this bill except for this item, and this item. So that's an interesting detail. I don't think it really is relevant in this case. But how realistic would it be for Congress to basically force the budget through against the president's wishes? Well, we both know, you and I, that we have a divided Congress right now. In the House, you have a Democratic majority. I think there's over 230 Democrats in the House compared to somewhere in the area of 180 to 190 Republicans. Even in the House, they couldn't get the needed 2/3 majority to override the vote. So here's the U.S. House. So you can see here, it's 435. You have one independent. So 235 Democrats, 199 Republicans. So they have an even thinner majority than the Republicans had in the last Congress. I don't even know why one is vacant. But in any case, that's not good for the Democrats, because in order to be able to pass this budget over the heads of the Republicans, they would need I think they would probably need, let's see, out of 435, they would need basically 290. Oh, it says right here, they need 290 people to vote for it. So they would need 235 plus 55 Republicans. I don't see that happening. Even the corporate Republicans, I don't think are going to break on this issue in the House. For the Senate to do it, it would be probably even harder right now. Let's go to the Senate. So you have the Republicans, and they have 53 seats. So for the Democrats to get an override, they would need 22 of those 53 Republicans to break and say, well, we're gonna vote for this budget whether Trump likes it or not. So that's what the Democrats can do to break the standoff without President Trump, signing their budget. Now, okay, so that's what the Congress could technically do in order to end this standoff without Trump signing the budget. Now with Trump, you have this. You have a couple of options available. Okay, there are a couple of things that he could do in order to, basically steamroll Congress. One of them is not really in his power. So you might remember that in the fall of 2017, Trump basically issued an executive order revoking the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program created by President Obama. And it says here, federal judges in California, New York, and Washington ruled Trump acted illegally when he tried to shut it down, and the matter is now before the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. The Trump administration has already asked the Supreme Court to take up the issue. Trump has previously floated the idea of agreeing to some new form of DACA, possibly as part of a deal that gets him the $5 billion in border wall funding he wants. But on Wednesday, he said it's best to wait for a Supreme Court ruling. I just think that we're better off waiting for the Supreme Court, he said. So this was said on January 2nd. I think he might have to wait a while to get this heard. But if it is heard, you have to remember. So if Trump wants to end DACA, regardless of the wall or not the wall, the track record of the Supreme Court in terms of approving these executive orders is pretty good. When he issued the travel ban, they did sustain Trump's argument that he could enact a travel ban on 7 countries in the Middle East and Northern Africa. And indeed, he won the day. So that is basically the best example of what he's talking about. And if he prevails on that note, the Democrats will be in a very tough position because they could hold tough on the wall, but then in order to have the DACA people protected from basically the immigration enforcement from ICE and other elements of the Homeland Security apparatus and their immigration enforcement measures, they would basically need to cut a deal with Trump in order to grant an amnesty for those people that are already here, and then they would have to go and say, yeah, we're going to give you money for this wall. That is already thought of as a likely compromise, and it's been debated. Last year it was debated, I believe in 2017. There were a lot of talks about DACA in exchange for the wall. Every time the Democrats walked away from it. I think that at a certain point, they're going to have to face up to the fact that DACA could be over and they're going to be screwed. It'll be pretty ugly when that happens. And it might be a good idea for them to approve the wall as soon as possible, because otherwise they're going to be in a very uncomfortable position if this becomes a DACA versus wall fight. Now about the national emergency. This is interesting. It's from NPR. It says, yes, the president can declare a national emergency to build the wall. President Trump declared over the weekend that he and his advisors were strongly considering a presidential declaration of a national emergency to bypass Congress and build a border wall. We're looking at a national emergency, Trump told reporters on Sunday, because we have a national emergency. And yet on Tuesday evening, in his first nationally broadcast Oval Office address, Trump made no mention of it in a speech focused on border security. That omission suggests 3 responsibilities. The president has backed off from resorting to a national emergency decree to break the impasse over border wall funding. Or he is simply using the threat of a national emergency to measure to pressure Congress to appropriate money for a wall. Or he fully intends to declare a national emergency along the southern border if Congress does not fund a wall. Back in the Oval Office on Wednesday, Trump assured reporters that a national emergency declaration remains an option. I think we might work a deal, and if we don't, I may go that route. I have the absolute right to do a national emergency if I want. Trump said he would decide on doing so if I can't make a deal with people that are unreasonable. And then this person says the president's correct. Let's see who this is. So, David Wellna on Twitter. So he's NPR's national security correspondent, and he covered debates on Capitol Hill over authorizing the use of military force, So this guy probably has sat on a lot of these topics before, not just concerning the wall and national emergencies, but other issues of, some of these touchy fights between Congress and the president, during the Bush era, etc. So, some scholars of presidential emergency powers say there is next to nothing, at least procedurally, that Capitol Hill could do to stop Trump from exercising what lawmakers of all stripes agree is his right to declare a national emergency. Congress chose not to put any substantial or really any barriers to the president's ability to declare a national emergency, says Elizabeth Gotine, co-director of the Brennan Center for Justice's Liberty and National Security Program. So if he can really just sign his name to a piece of paper, whether it is a real emergency or not, she adds, that creates a state of emergency that gives him access to these special powers that are contained in more than 100 different provisions of law that Congress has passed over the years. Trump has already invoked national emergency powers on 3 occasions, adding to the 28 earlier national emergency measures that remain in effect. Almost all of them, including those signed by Trump, were invoked to freeze foreign nationals' assets in the U.S. The longest-standing decree dates to November 1979, when President Jimmy Carter froze Iran's U.S.-held assets. Gotine's Brennan Center has compiled a list of 136 statutory powers that Congress grants the occupant of the Oval Office on an emergency basis. Now remember, the Democrats they don't have enough power. They only have the House. So even if they wanted to take back one of those powers, they couldn't. They would have to have the Senate go along with them to revoke that statutory power. Emergency powers have a place in democracy, says Gotine. The concern is that in an emergency, in a true emergency, which is unforeseen and unforeseeable, the laws that are on the books might not be sufficient to deal with the emergency. It's this idea that extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures. The problem, she adds, is that democracy also has a place in emergency powers. And that's where I feel like our current system isn't serving us very well. But that, so she's addressing the fact that she doesn't really think that this is an adequate system. She's not actually going out there and saying this is bad because of Trump, but she is admitting that he has the power to do this. Another expert on national emergency powers agrees. I think part of the problem here is that history messed with Congress' original plan, says Stephen Vladeck, who teaches at the University of Texas Austin School of Law. So in any case, I will put all the links here. Thank you to Impex about the question about the congressional resolution on the budget. Talk to you guys later. Please like this channel. Subscribe to Bold Like a Leopard on YouTube. Also, my other channels, Razor Ray Special Cuts on YouTube. I'm also at Chef Leopard on BitChute. And on Cocoscope, I'm Bold Like a Leopard. You can find all of the other information in the links below. And I'll talk to you guys later.